Okay, hello and welcome to this tutorial where I want to talk about various things relating to trim sheets. There's not going to be any detailed modeling in this video. It's going to be just tips and tricks surrounding the trim sheets. So hopefully that's interesting. It's a lot of organization. It's getting things set up and ready so that you can just speed through the creation of trim sheets. And if you find it interesting, we can look at modeling some more in-depth ones in the future. Um, so let's just start with the setup for baking them, because I like to have a plane on the background and plane up top for the baker, because I'm going to be exporting that and using that. I bake my trim sheets in Substance Designer. And the reason I use Substance Designer is because some of the tips later on are going to make it more difficult to bake things like ambient occlusion, unless you're deriving them from the normal map or height map. So that's just a good way to do it. And yeah, so the main thing is for speed. I mean, if you're already good at modeling, then that's one thing. But there's a few tricks here that help speed things up. And the first one is I've got a sort of shape kit created over here. Um, and the way that was made, because we've got two types of decal and trim sheet. There's the actual decals that you will place on your place across as like panels and so on. And then you've got the actual trims, which are tiling left to right. And the thing with the trims that tile left to right is you want to be adding more detail across it, but at the same time, it's like the thinner it is, the more space you have to work horizontally. And then the thicker, the quicker it's going to tile, depending on where it's used. And you can see some examples of that later on if that didn't make sense. So just creating this, it's just another plane. And again, like the vertical length is kind of arbitrary because you want to, these trims are going to be used across any sort of length. But if you do know what the size of them is, then you can build your models to match the width of the trim sheet as well. So I can turn on my edge length. That one's 0.25, and then just going to carry on like that because I halved it. 125 and 0.625, so really, really thin. But that doesn't really matter because this is all also tied to the resolution of your texture. If it's a 4K texture, maybe you want to divide these by 2. If it's a 2K trim sheet, you might want to make them slightly bigger, 1K and so on. So creating it, I'm just going to create a line in the middle, and I just halved it all the way down this sort of level. And then you can just grab those different sections, press P to separate them. And then this one, I just think it's too big. At that point, if you're creating something that needs this much detail, it's taking up the majority of what we're assuming is going to be a square trim sheet. So we'll just ignore that one, and I'm going to delete it or make the visuals a little bit better. So that's those ones created. And then these other ones, you just want to create this square and subdivide a few times until we get a nice scale on these. I'll also turn the edge length off. So this one's probably fine at this scale. And again, it doesn't really matter what the scale of these are because you can scale them up and down. It's just to create these base shapes. So I just separated a single square, a double, a long, and then like super long as sort of a baseline. And then you want a square because if that is basically the same as this one on the left but rotated, so we're not going to do that one. We'll just create a few different lengths of these. So I'll just do this. And then if you really want like a big square as like a big detail, we can do that. I didn't do it. And then I just press W, set origin to geometry. That's going to sort that out. And now we're at that point over here where I've named it the shape kit over here. I'm not really bothered about naming these because they're just a background shape. But the whole idea is that if I want to create a trim of this sort of length, I've got an idea of what I want to make, and I've just easily got it set up so I can just duplicate, move it into my active zone, Alt-G to move it back to the center. We're not too bothered about what we're doing with it right now. We're just modeling it. I'm going to duplicate it upwards just in case I start chopping this up a lot or doing slightly more funky things like arraying along it and then not matching the exact footprint. But we'll create that standard trim that's really just going to be used with everything. Because no matter what trim sheet you're creating, you don't want a panel lined. So I extrude that down. And now I can bevel this. And then we've just sort of, shade it smooth. And we've got ourselves just a basic panel line that we've created. If there was a version of this that I wanted to create, which it might be a bit small to do this example, so I'll swap to a bigger one. Another important thing with trim sheets is just remember that it's all up to 90-degree angles, and sometimes you're going to want a 45-degree angle. So we'll create that in a second. I've got it on snapping closest vertex. So when I move it over here, I can use that background one just to move this like that. And snap it so I can start creating this trim sheet and sort of be aware of where I'm creating. So if I do just create a cube now and bevel the edge, we can kind of assume that there's a base sort of length. If I wanted to create, something too small, but maybe something like that, I would use the standard, this is just Decal Machine examples that I'm using. So if I want to just create a standard panel line like that, then we know it's going to be on that sort of length. The problem with these are, if I wanted to have a trim that looks like it's going over the edge. So if I just draw on this, if I want a trim that's going to go over and on a 45-degree, because when I'm using the trim sheet, I do that quite a lot. So I just end up with a lot of edges basically. So if I go back onto this, let's try a different trim. I'll just change the width of that using Mesh Machine. If we've got one like this, maybe not, I'll just scroll through them. Yeah, this is a good example. You see how this trim has been built so that what I just added to it, it looks like there's an edge here, really sharp 90-degree angle edge. But then this detail looks like it flows directly into, and this one here looks like it flows directly in to the geometry. And I think some people just don't create trim sheets like that. So if I just remove that annotation, so that's looking really nice. It looks like they blend together. I mean, there is still going to be a line because it's not perfect, but this one here, that one's definitely going into a different angle. So if I were to use this trim differently, it looks like, to make this look work properly, I take this face angle and just extrude on the Z. It looks like it's been built to fit into that. In fact, it even looks a little bit like the trim's not fully lined up, but you get the idea. That's a full 90-degree turn that's being made by the looks of it. And then this one over here is a 45-degree turn. So if I want to create something similar, I would duplicate this upwards, just remove that. And then I'm just going to remove that. And it's just as simple as extruding upwards and beveling. So now when viewed from above, we're getting that 45-degree angle. So if I change this to a matcap for normals, you're getting the 45-degree that way and the 45-degree that way. So it's going to blend exactly like how they did. And to create that specific sort of shape, I bevel this once, and then bevel this one. Then you can start creating that sort of shape that they've got. And then, yeah, they would have left that face just on the front. And so then this curves over and then curves again. So when viewed from the top, it curves on a different angle, but the end angle, this one right down at the bottom, is still 45 degrees. So it blends into that 45-degree turn. But if I want to create a shape like this, it doesn't have to be created as part of the model. So this is a good example. So if I try and separate this shape that I just created, then I'm going to end up with something. If I just remove all of those, bear with me. I'll just fix them up. So now this is completely separate, and that's good because if I've modeled anything more complex on here, and I suddenly decide, you know what, actually, now that I look at it, I've created that a scale that is too big, then I can maybe just set this to my active point and scale it down. And because I scaled it from the active point that was still in line with that, it's creating an illusion that it's still part of the same mesh because we're seeing it from the top angle. And it means I've got a bit more freedom now without having to change the whole mesh to just go through and make sure this is the right type of shape that I want. And it's always going to be modeled. I would still kind of have those options if I decided to change this into something else. So if I bevel this, bearing in mind that I really want to bevel this by a specific amount. So I've gone with 0.1. So I've typed 0.1 in, beveled it by 0.1. I'm going to shade it smooth. So now it's not going to blend in, right? But I've used a specific amount, so I can bevel this at 0.01. And it's using offset mode. So that was a mistake. It's quite annoying, actually. The default Blender mode is using offset, which is going to be kind of random. I'd rather use width. So if I make sure this is width, it's probably going to be 0.001. Let's change it to 9. Just to make sure we're getting this without clamping on the side there. Shade it smooth. Bevel this by the same. And it's on width mode, so that should be exactly the same. It is not. So I scaled it down. I scaled down edit mode though, so this shouldn't really be. Shouldn't be different sizes. Probably missing something quite obvious here. I'm working quite late. So I don't know why they're coming out different sizes. I'm just going to try it again. Okay, I can't go that far back. So now I guess I'll just view it from the top, and I'll just match the bevel by eye in this case. Idea being that they're going to match. Now this looks slightly funky because if we do view this outside of the matcap, all of that shading is affecting the weight of this. So I'm going to add a weight of normal to fix this up. it wouldn't be such a problem with subdivision modifier. I'm going to add keep sharp and face influence. I'm going to press Alt N in this case to make sure that these faces are set to a strong influence. If I turn that on and off, you can see the difference it makes. I'll just do the same on these, and then I'll copy modifiers. So now we've got exactly the same response, and I probably didn't pixel perfect match that. Again, do it in a way that actually works. I want to work out that issue while I'm recording. But it's close enough, and now they look like they blend into each other because I've made sure that the normals are matching. You could also just copy the normals from the shape below if you had anything more advanced going on. But if I turn that back to matcap, you can see that it looks like it's part of it. And if I wanted to, now that I've got a bit more freedom, I can array this, decide on a distance that I like. Well, the distance actually is going to be affected by the amount of times that I want it to appear. So if I want it to appear a weird number of times, like 9, if it was 8, that'd be a lot easier. If I make it appear 9 times, and I'm just going to set the origin to the end here, so that's not playing a part. I just set origin to 3D cursor, snap this back to the start to make sure that they're working on tile, and we can see that it's not going to tile at the end here. I know I've arrayed it 9 times, and I know that what I'm creating as a baseline has 2 meters long. So 2 divided by 9, and that, well, it's a relative offset, sorry. So I want to make it a constant offset, 2 divided by 9. And now that should tile. If I wanted to center it, I'd have to offset this by half of that. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult, but I'd want to, well, we know it's -1. So I'm just going to add -1 plus that amount that we're offsetting. And it should be divided by 2, unless I'm mistaken, because we want to just push it halfway along. That clearly hasn't worked. So my maths there must be a little bit off. And again, I'm not going to be able to, I'll just grab it on the X. I'll just grab it on the X and I will just enter this value divided by 2. That's not right. It should be that value. Yeah, divided by 2. I'm going to do it again. So that's too far. Let's just find out what the value is. Somewhere way over here. So I'm not quite sure what the issue there is. That in my head that works, but you get the idea. If you want to offset it, easier just working from the from the baseline here. I know this is going to tile because that distance there should lead back into this one at the same. If I array it one more time, then we know that it's creating an extra one on the end. And that goes for all details. So I think that pretty much covers that idea. There's a more advanced version of it that I just want to show as well. It really isn't based on a basic example like that. I've used it in an example where if I extrude this upwards, get rid of them for now, extrude that downwards, and I'm just going to separate that off. Oh, and it's another good thing here. So I know this one's in line, but this one isn't. I'm going to parent that plane as a background, and then just use that background plane to snap that in line, because I've got it on closest vertex. And now here, if I've decided I want it to be a little bit more advanced, so I'm going to use subdivision surface workflow on this one. I'm going to grab these side edges, and annoyingly, this is going to cause an issue later, but if I press Control V, sorry, what is it? Just Alt V, no, not Alt V, Shift E, Alt V. Control V is the one that I was looking for. Sorry, my brain's not with it today. Control V and change this to vertex crease. If I increase that, then it's going to make sure that that's keeping them perfectly straight. Annoyingly, now when I add a ring loop, that's going to have the vertex crease, so I'll have to remember to remove those later on. But the example that I want to create here actually does include doing this. I don't need two halves, right? So I'm going to delete that and then just mirror this. I've not got my add-ons, so I'm just going to add the mirror, put it above the subdivision, mirror it on the Y. Okay, now I'm getting somewhere that I want to be. So sorting this out to something a little bit more advanced like this. This isn't exactly what I'd want to create. Vertex crease, turn that to -1. And again, -1 to remove them. And what I want here is a detail going along the inside of it. But as I was saying, if things are getting really messy, let's say I've created, again, similar details to this up here, but I've decided to create them into the model this time because it was easier, then you can still just separate any details as easy as possible. So if I just grab another edge up here, then I added that vertex crease at an annoying time, so I'm going to remove it. Bevel this. If I separate this now, and say I only really want the vertical boot tail, but I can move that up here, shade them both smooth, because it's got a subdivision surface, so weighted normals isn't bothered anymore. But you can see the reason it looks like it's hidden is I've actually got outlines turned off. But it's completely blended in, which means if I want to go a little bit further with this, I need to maintain these two edges on the side. So that's why I've added in those extra vertices. But what I want to do is extrude this down. Sort it out a little bit. And due to the shape that I'm creating, I can't really tighten up this this curve too much. So it's going to have to be like this. I can tighten up that bottom curve if I really want. I'm creating it in a shape like that. Just going to move them. And from above here, it's now looking like I've modeled in some kind of indent, but without making it too complicated for the mesh. And again, I can decide exactly how many of these I want. So I'm going to now add the array. And maybe I just want it to be a simple value like 0.25. So then I know I've got to array that 8 times. So I've made that a lot easier on myself. The only thing is that when I bake this, I can't bake the ambient occlusion. I can only bake the normal and height. So I want to bake the height. Well, actually, I can't even bake the height. I want to get the height from the normal map to then get an ambient occlusion from that height. It's not the most perfect way, but also with the trims anyway, you don't want too much ambient occlusion. You want it to only appear in the specific islands. That is something that's a little bit easier done without this method. But if you're on a tight schedule and you want to just create some trim sheets without the stress of modeling something super advanced, that's a good way to do it. So I can see how far they go in. I'm going to go do one more thing, but I know that I'm not overlapping it by doing this. And we'll just create a detail that's similar to what we just saw. We'll do a quick solid thing. Just remove all them for now. Just going to remove half of this, make it easier on myself. Bevel those. You can see as long as that bottom edge isn't overlapping with what I just created, which in this case created it a little bit too close. I'm just going to take the normal of this, add it as a transform, face transform. Just going to move that along on the X. Apparently I've got that on. Just going to move that so that it doesn't overlap with this. And now I've got something that, might be similar to what we were seeing earlier. And I can go ahead without having to worry about these shapes. I can add another loop in here. Ideally, it would be a little bit more mathematically accurate. Grab those, grab them on the Y, X, sorry, because I just saved that face value earlier, so I'm just shifting it up. Bevel those. Change that to be a little bit smoother. And I've started creating a more advanced shape just to, with all this detail in here. Maybe again, you could separate it off and create more stuff on there. But as an example, that's where I'm at. So hopefully it's useful. I'll see you in the next one.